Disclaimer: all the materials and examples used in this video are only for educational purpose. Hacking or attempting to hack anything without permission is illegal. Hey guys, Venki here. Welcome back to another video of my channel. Today I'm going to talk about SQL injection, as well as I'm going to show you a demonstration of SQL injection attack. Okay, first of all, what is SQL injection? It is very simple. It is a technique of code injection to execute a malicious SQL query against the database. So how does this SQL injection works? It is very simple again. Let's imagine we have a web application where we can log in into the application using username and password. Yeah, whenever we type username and password in the login form, it will validate that username and password against a database. So to validate that, a web application need to compose a query, and that query need to be executed against a database. As we see on the screen, web application composing a query like this, and then executing against a database. So here we are embedding login form parameters into a SQL query, which means whatever user typed in the login form, that is being passed into SQL database as a SQL query. Typically, this is nothing but we are giving an opportunity to the end user who are trying to log in from the HTML page. They can execute anything against the database. So here an end user, instead of providing username as abc@xyz.com, they can provide any malicious SQL scripts that can be executed against the database. One of the simplest example here, an end user can inject a malicious SQL statement as I showed here. Instead of typing abc@xyz.com as a username, they can type single colon space or space 1 equal to 1 space hyphen hyphen. What does that mean is it will execute that parameter into SQL database, which means username equal to empty or 1 equal to 1, and then ignore all the remaining SQL conditions. It is very simply, this SQL statement will be always true because we are selecting null username or 1 equal to 1. 1 equal to 1 is always true. So at any point in time, it will return a valid result. By injecting this SQL statement, end user bypassing a password authentication, which means they will be allowed to log in into web application all the time. Like this, any malicious SQL statements can be injected and executed against a database. This can be achieved in two ways. If a web application using get method, we can pass these parameters along with the URL. By any chance, if the application is using post method, we can inject that through form fields, which I will show in the live demonstration. So now let's get into some action. I have already set up a web application for this demonstration. First thing is we need to identify whether this web application is vulnerable to SQL injection. So whenever you are searching anything, if it is passing along with that URL parameter, try to pass single quote additionally along with the parameter. By any chance, if web application is throwing error message, which means you are able to pass malicious SQL query to the database and it is failing, that proves us this application is vulnerable to SQL injection. From that point, we can keep composing malicious SQL scripts and try to execute along with the parameter. So here I'm just providing single quote space order by 1, and then I'm providing ignore remaining SQL statement whatever being executed by application. So it is successfully able to execute and return the results, which means I executed and ordered the return result based on the column 1. If I keep changing the column number 1 to 2, 3, 4, likewise I can see it is keep on sorting out. But at one stage it failed, which means the column 8 doesn't available in the table, which gives a clue to an attacker saying that this table contains 8 columns and the return result is fetched from the 8 columns. So an attacker can further explore into composing a new query. So what we can do, we can just try to add union statement. So from the same URL parameters, I'm trying union, select 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, then ignore all the remaining statements, which means it will return the search result plus union of my select statement, which is nothing but 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So we can see on the screen here result of the select statement being printed, which means whatever we execute, that is visible on the screen. So I just changed a column 2 with the version. I'm able to see version of the database. Likewise, you can keep on changing or passing any other SQL statement to get the result, which can be visible on the screen. As we see, I already got a database version and a database username and a database name as well. From the earlier error message, we identified that this application is using MySQL database. So now I'm trying to pull out all the table names from MySQL using information schema. So this is the query which can help us to identify all the table names which can be injected through SQL parameter. Now I'm going to replace column number 5 from the select statement with this query and execute. We should be able to see complete table names whatever available from the MySQL database. Here we go. It is listing out all the table names from the application database. By this SQL injection, we already hacked the database. We know database version, we know database user ID, which is nothing but root, and we know all the table names. Likewise, we can replace and execute any SQL statement to get the data. Whatever I showed you are all manual methods which are time consuming. Now I'm going to show you a tool which is automated with all these SQL injection techniques. That is nothing but SQLMAP. Before I get into SQLMAP, let me show you one vulnerable application which is hosted on internet that is available for us to do a penetration testing. So first we need to identify whether this application is vulnerable to SQL injection. As I showed in the previous example, we need to identify where we can pass any URL parameters. So I'm just browsing through the web application and I can see there is a URL parameter being passed in one web page. This is the exact place where we can explore and identify whether this website is vulnerable to SQL injection. As I mentioned, just type a single quote along with the parameter and see whether it is throwing any database error. If it throws the database error, which means application is vulnerable for SQL injection. Here we go. I just typed a single quote in the URL parameter and it throws the SQL error. Also, the error explains us this database is MySQL. So now we can perform SQL injection attack against this website. Let's copy this URL. That URL can be injected into SQLMAP tool. I will show you how to use SQLMAP and perform SQL injection attack. I'm going to use Kali Linux machine for this example. SQLMAP is installed in Kali Linux machine by default. If it is not available, you can use apt-get command to get this installed. This SQLMAP tool is very powerful and using it is very simple. Just type SQL command and then pass the URL as a parameter, and then I'm requesting to return all the available databases. Then passing verbose as a parameter to capture the debug log as well. So just set debug mode to 2, that should be enough. We can see the complete information. As the command executed already, we can see whatever we have done from the first example manually, all those steps has been automated through this tool. The tool will be trying the same technique, SQL injection technique, and extracted result for us. It took nearly less than a minute to extract the information. We already identified the database name and the databases which is configured for this web application. Database name is nothing but SQLART, and information schema is a default database comes for MySQL. So our target is going to be SQLART database. So now we have the database server which is nothing but MySQL and database name SQLART. Now let's try to pull out all the tables from the database. So execute the SQL command as I showed. It will take a while to execute. Perfect. SQLMAP already pulled out all the table names for us. Now We got the database server and database name and table names. Let's pick any one table from the list and try to get all the column names. So now I'm targeting to pull out column names from the table called users, because generally user credentials will be stored under the users table. So I'm trying to read the data from the table called users. I can already see this tool pulled out all the column names from the table called users. As we see, this table have plenty of columns, but I will be interested to see only the username and password, because hackers will be trying to exploit on the critical information. So I'm going to fetch out username and the password which is stored inside this table. Once we pass the command, we can use -dump parameter, which will pull out all the data from the database and display it here. See, already we got username and password from the database. See here, this web application is highly vulnerable to SQL injection, and we are able to steal user credential from the database as well. Now let's see whether this credential is working on the website or not. I'm just typing test to test whatever the information we got from the SQLMAP tool. I'm trying to validate whether this is working fine or not. Click on login. Bingo, we are able to log in into the website properly. This is one of the basic SQL injection attack I just demonstrated. Likewise, we can pull out all the information from the database. We can perform a file import and file export feature also through SQL injection, which I will show it in the next demonstration. Also guys, I'll be capturing all these SQLMAP commands in the video description for your reference. And mainly, not only SQL statement execution, we can get into SQL Shell by performing this attack. So we can use SQLMAP command and request for SQL Shell as I typed above. It will land us to SQL Shell. By any chance, if this application is using root permission user, we can even shut down the database by performing this attack. Generally, hackers or an attacker will use Google Dorking to identify vulnerable website for SQL injection. They use Google search engine. In the search query, they can provide in URL and then some sample parameterized URL. Google search engine will return plenty of websites which they explore or try to identify SQL injection vulnerability. I have already published a number of videos about Google Dorking. If you want to learn, start with this video. That's all for today guys. Hope this demonstration helps. I will cover how we can prevent this SQL injection in my next video. Please subscribe and stay tuned.